Of the Bible to talk about tonight, and there are some quite fascinating and fairly sort of descriptive verses that we'll look at tonight and hopefully bring out some great lessons. So let's get straight into it with chapter 9 and the little story in verse 13 through to the end of chapter 9. I'll just read that for you and then we'll pick out some lessons. So it says there, I saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built a huge siege against this city. Now there lived in that city a man, poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. But no one remembered that poor man. So I said to myself, wisdom is better than strength. But the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. So that's a little story that the writer of this book, Ecclesiastes, which we believe was Solomon, uses to make this very powerful point that wisdom is better than strength. And he does that on the basis of this poor man who was very wise, and his wisdom saved this little city from a great king who laid siege against this city with what it describes as huge weapons of war. And we might sort of think about those old images of a city where there's an invader who lays siege against it, throwing big rocks up against it, etc., to try to overcome this city. And we specifically read that it's a small city with only a few people in it. And yet this wise man's words are able to save this city. And Solomon says that the quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. So let's look then at the two lessons. One, wisdom is better than strength, and then we'll look at the second one, the quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. Now, right back a very, very, very long time ago, in the 6th century before Christ, so way before Jesus, there was a general in the Chinese army who, when it comes to military things, is the most famous military figure in history. You may have heard of him, you may not. His name was Sun Tzu, and he's regarded as the father of all military strategy. He wrote a book. It's a very famous book. It's still used by generals today. And it's called The Art of War. The Art of War. And in it, he is, many of what he said is considered to be the wisest words concerning warfare to this day. 3 pretty famous statements. And I believe it was words along these lines that this poor yet wise man no doubt shared with the other members of the city in his time. Here's some of his statements. Every battle is won or lost before it is ever fought. You might think about that in the context of sport. It's often won well before the actual match day. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Think about that, to subdue the enemy without actually engaging in any fighting at all. Wise warriors avoid battle was the other one of his famous statements. Because the fact of the matter is, no one is a winner in war. Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of the famous general in World War II, she said, no one won the last war, and no one will win the next war. And I think that's very true. No one wins in war. War is always catastrophic, devastating. The loss of life is shocking. And yet fools, often in the sort of Old English language, spoil for war. They want to fight. And so this very wise man, I'm sure, used the wisdom of words like what Sun Tzu said. Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to conquer one's enemy is to make them your friend. If you make them your friend, they're no longer your enemy, are they? And that actually is thought to come from also the words of Sun Tzu, because he said, you should, and you probably have heard this, always keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And so I think it was these kinds of words of wisdom from this poor man that saved that city. Wisdom is better than strength. And young people, that's very true of us today. Jesus didn't ever advocate fighting or war. You may have been the subject of bullying. You might have been picked on even. It's not the right thing to respond with our fists, is it? It's tempting. It's very tempting. But often our words, carefully chosen, can really diffuse a situation before it gets way out of hand. And so I think this advice here from Solomon is very relevant even today. Wisdom is better than strength. And I think for us, young people, it's really important for us to remember that in our life today as well. It's also important to remember, or to always keep in mind, that wisdom doesn't have a currency. It can't be bought. And yet, in our society, there's a real temptation to attribute wisdom to wealthy or notable people. Have you noticed that? Words from someone who has multiple degrees, who is a professor, or someone who's very wealthy and successful in business are quoted. People sort of live their life by the rules or the pronouncements of the wealthy or the educated. But as for a poor man or woman, their words are often discounted. And yet for us in the ecclesia, it ought not to be like that, should it? Because we are all one in Jesus. Okay, there's no difference in terms of the wisdom that we can share between rich or poor, between the poor and the not so poor, we might put it. And yet there is a real temptation or a vulnerability for all of us to still fall prey to showing that sort of partiality or favouritism, to be, as the word is, to be more deferential to wealthy or educated people and to just walk straight by the poor people. Jesus talks about it's not good just to invite people back to your home that can afford to invite you back. Jesus was generous and kind to everyone, not expecting anything in return. Let me read to you a very powerful passage from James chapter 2, verse 1. You might want to look it up, or I'll read it to you. James 2, verse 1. My brothers, as believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, don't show favouritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in shabby clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, hey, here's a seat for you, but say to the poor man, oh, you stand back there or sit on the floor by my feet, have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Judges with evil thoughts. And elsewhere, James says to show favouritism is a sin. So just remember that, young people. Let's never show more deference or a preference to the words of people we might think are successful. They might be sort of more wealthy than us. They might be more educated than us. In the ecclesial context, we are all one in Christ Jesus. All of the contributions of our brethren and sisters are valuable and should be respected. And also, just remember in life, I think this is just a life lesson, that the loudest person in a room is very rarely the smartest. Okay, so here we have this poor man. It refers to the quiet words of the wise, in contrast to the shouting of the fool. Often the foolish or the fool is loud and brash, full of bravado. Let's take up the fight, and the consequences are devastating. Often the wise have more the still small voice of God or of the Bible, and they deserve to be listened to. So let's not always just give the hearing to the loudest in our committee work, in the ecclesia, in your youth circle. Make sure you include sometimes those that are very wise but maybe a little shyer or less inclined to be so forthcoming with their thoughts. All right, there's another little statement that is quite powerful in verse 18. It says there, one sinner destroys much good. One sinner destroys much good. Now, I was thinking back to Sunday school lessons of the Battle of Ai. Do you remember that? They all went up for the fight, and it went horribly wrong, and a whole bunch of people died because of one guy, Achan. He stole stuff, and there were really bad consequences. One sinner or one sin can destroy a lot of good. Now, I want to bust a myth right here. Because as young people, and even as adults and brethren and sisters, we have a few common little sayings, right? And one of the common little sayings that we've maybe said ourselves, or you've certainly heard it, I'm sure, is all sin is sin. Have you ever heard that? All sin is sin? Yeah? You've heard that? All sin is sin. Well, that's true, right? Because any sin, the wages, or what we get for any sin is death. The wages of sin is death. So it is true to say that the consequence of any sin, all sin, is the same. But let me say very clearly, it is very wrong to say or imply that all sins are equal, because they're not. The impact and consequences of sin can differ substantially. Okay? The consequences is consistent, but they are not equal. Okay, so I'll give you an example. 2 seconds ago, I just swore in my head. Didn't really. But you didn't hear it, nobody heard it. But if I had, it's a sin, right? But did it directly or immediately affect anyone? Any of you? If I swore under my breath and nobody heard it, would anyone be directly affected by that? No. Yes, it's a sin. Yes, the consequence of all sin is death. Compare, I ask you, that to, for example, unfaithfulness in a marriage. The consequences of that sin and the impact can extend to many people across many generations and right across ecclesias. Okay, so yes, it's true, and we should be careful when we say, oh, all sin is sin. Yes, it is. But some sins have devastating consequences. One sin, one sinner can destroy a lot of good. And that saying there in Ecclesiastes, I believe, then, is very, very, very powerful. One sin can destroy a lot of good. You know, I've been reminded of that personally in the role that I have in life. Not my job, but I sit on a board of a business, you might describe it as. It's a very large business here in South Australia. I won't refer to it particularly, but it's received a lot of news, and some of you perhaps attend this institute or place to be educated. And the equivalent of the CEO made a very poor decision on a number of occasions. And the consequences of that for that institution have been diabolical for the man's family, his wife, his children, the students, the staff, the lot. Everyone's been affected. One or a couple of dumb decisions, the impact massive. So the lesson, I think, in all of that is to think before we act, to pause and consider. I have just a funny little thing that I do. When tempted by sin, try to put in front of your face the people that mean the most to you. So for me, I try to see Lizzie, my wife. I try to see Lucy. Would she be proud of her dad for doing a dumb thing? Or the boys. How could I ever talk to the boys about what's right or wrong and I do a dumb thing? What about my brother and sisters, the ecclesia? Try to use little methods to keep yourself honest, because one poor decision, one sin can have devastating consequences. Now, I also like to think that this little story in Ecclesiastes 9 is a bit of a type of the future, right? So if you think about our community, we are a little city with few people in it. There's not that many Christadelphians, right? We're a little city with few people in it. Paul in Romans chapter 5 and Romans 6 describes sin as a king, right? He says, sin reigns unto death. He says, introduce us to King Sin. And sin, I'm sure we all feel this, is constantly at war with us. We are besieged from all sides by sin. You know, you have to just switch on your news feed, switch on Safari, switch on TV, Netflix, whatever, and we see it from all sides. We hear it, we see it, and it's constantly assaulting us, laying siege against us. Jesus was a poor man by the world's standards. He didn't even have a place to lay his head, it says, right? He is the poor yet wise man. In the New Testament, it refers to him as the greater than Solomon is here, wiser than the wisest man. So the message, young people, is when we are besieged by sin, how do we respond? By relying on our own strength, just ourselves, or do we have the wise man in our hearts? Do we have the wise man, Jesus, in our ecclesias? Paul talks about having Christ in us. Okay, the mind of Jesus in us. That's how we fight. That's how Jesus fought. How did Jesus fight temptation? With the Word of God. And who epitomized the Word of God? Jesus. So if we have Him in our hearts, Him in our minds, Him in our city, our community, our ecclesias, we can withhold, we can hold up, and we will not succumb ultimately to sin. Sin will not have the victory over us. The Apostle Paul, if you're making notes, refers to a magnificent statement in Romans 8 verse 37. He says, with Jesus in our hearts and minds, we are more than conquerors. So if we take Jesus into our hearts, if we are baptized into Him, we can be more than conquerors against sin which constantly assaults us. All right, let's keep moving. Ecclesiastes 10, verse 1 to 3. Now, this is fairly evocative language. It says here, as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, it's fairly heavy, So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honour. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. It's fairly graphic, isn't it? It's also fairly graphic at the start there, this putrefying flies corrupt even the most beautiful fragrance. So you might think of some beautiful women's perfume. It's going to be corrupted by putrefying flies that stink. And the point that Solomon's making is that folly is very potent. It can overpower wisdom and honour. Folly is incredibly powerful. It can overwhelm wisdom and honour. So one act of folly can destroy wisdom and honour. You know, young people, there's a great saying that goes like this: it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and seconds to destroy it. Think of the example that I gave before. Someone who had the world at their feet, an immaculate reputation, earning, over $1 million a year. Bang, gone. Perfume corrupted by putrefying flies. A reputation built over a lifetime, smashed in a second. So young people, take care of your reputation. It is in many respects, this is not so much a religious comment, but just a life comment. It is your greatest asset. Or we might actually say better, take care of your character and your reputation will follow. Okay? But remember that it's very precious. It can be broken very easily. And also we need to remember the very profound words of Jeremiah 17 verse 9. You'll know these words: the heart of man and women is deceitful above all things. It's desperately wicked. Who can know it? The point of that who can know it is it's impossible to know it without the mind of Christ. Now, in this regard, I think it's very important that we talk about something which in psychology are called disinhibitors or disinhibition. What does that mean? So to be inhibited is to be careful, to be concerned about your behaviour or your conduct. Add dis to the front of it and it means you don't care. Okay? So a word in psychology used for people that sometimes are somewhat socially awkward because they do things that normally in social context you wouldn't do, but also rashness, poor judgment, poor risk management. What do you think the biggest disinhibitor in the world is? It's alcohol. It's alcohol. If you've lived a bit, and I'm starting to get into that territory, where I have lived a bit, I can assure you, having had for a while, like for about 4 years, I had HR at work report through to me. Every incident that we dealt with that was sexual harassment had alcohol involved, period. Every single one. Why? Because let's be honest, and some of you in this room can probably recount your own experience, sadly, if you are intoxicated, you do dumb stuff that you wouldn't normally do. There was a dude this morning on the radio who got busted for driving at 0.15? So that would be 3 times, yeah? 3 times over. And he tried to outrun the cops. I mean, you don't normally do that stuff, right? You find people do really crazy stuff that they deeply regret afterwards, and they pay the price massively, right? Under the influence of alcohol, you can do things that once sober, you regret for the rest of your life. So be careful with alcohol. And the other one, the number 2, is drugs. Why drugs can be far more damaging as a disinhibitor, but they're not as freely available, and they can tend to be more expensive, whereas alcohol, so widely available and doesn't have, to an extent, the same social frowning that drugs still has, right? That's why alcohol is a bigger problem. So be careful, young people. Our reputations can be smashed in a moment. And you know, it's very true in life that often bad stuff appeals more, you know? You probably have a slightly greater affinity to going to Macca's than you do getting, what's that stuff the Samuels grow? No, well that's bad too. But the other one, kale, right? You probably like a Big Mac more than kale. It's kind of like eating a tree. It's actually not bad when it's cooked, but sometimes really healthy stuff doesn't taste so good. Sin's like that, but you want to eat it. Sin's like that. The Bible talks about being enticed by sin. It is enticing. It talks about the pleasures of sin. Why? Because they are pleasurable, right? That's the big problem, because you've got to learn to say no. And that involves discipline. It's not easy. It's not easy. So there's two big things that are important I've found in life. One, in 1 Corinthians 5 verse 6, Paul says, "Don't you know that a little leaven or yeast leavens the whole lump?" So think of your brain as a big spongy ball of dough, right? The point is, if you let a little bit of yeast in there, it'll infect the lot. There was a fairly famous Christadelphian brother called John Carter, and he said this very profound statement. He said, "The human mind is insensibly, in sense you can't feel it, you might say unconsciously, affected by the stream of thoughts passing through it." Okay? Edward de Bono likened the brain to an upside-down bowl of jelly, and you drip water on it. Eventually you'll find a root, and then all the water will go down that little sort of root till eventually the bowl of jelly is cut in half. The point is, our minds are affected by the stream of thoughts passing through it. What are we taking into our minds? There's a new app out, by the way, and if you want to keep yourself honest, sign up to this app. It's a great app. You go onto the app, you sign up to send your internet history to somebody. All of it. So, Ollie, you can do that tonight. That would be good. What it does is it keeps you honest. So, mum, dad, your mate, your friend can see your entire internet history. It helps you, right? Because we don't feel good if we go surfing porn, do we? Afterwards, you don't feel good about that. You feel bad, really bad. So take steps to stop yourself doing those things. Change the things that are flowing through your head and put deliberate obstacles in your way. Because we don't want to do that. That's not who we are. That's not what we've been called to, is it? At all. So that's the stream of thoughts passing through our mind. The other one is the company we keep. Because in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33 it says this, "Don't be misled, bad company corrupts good character." So little bit of leaven corrupts the whole bread dough. Bad company, bad company corrupts good character. So ask yourself the question, who are you surrounding yourself with? Is your friendship group constructive? Yeah, they're fun, they're great to be around, and we have some fun, and we enjoy our youth, but generally speaking, they're good people. They're surfing the same wave, they're singing from the same hymn book, we might say. They want to be in the kingdom, they're constructive, they're not just constantly pushing the envelope. They're helping me, not hindering me. They're good questions to ask. All right. There's a lot more I had intended to say on that, but we'll keep ourselves moving. We'll go to Ecclesiastes 10 verse 4 to 11. And here we have, I'll just quickly skim through the verses and we'll pick some points out. says there, if a ruler's anger rises against you, don't leave your post. Calmness can lay great offences to rest. There is an evil I've seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in high places, while the rich occupy low ones. I've seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones could be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. If a snake bites before it's charmed, the charmer receives no fee. So very interesting words there. Some of it's quite funny almost. But I wanted to just pick out one little bit that I reckon contains a great life lesson and also one for us who endeavour to follow Jesus. It says in verse 4, if a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offences to rest. Now, very, very similar words can be found in Proverbs 15, verse 1. And it says there, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So see that a gentle or a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh response or harsh words stir up anger. So here Solomon's giving us some very wise words. He says that calmness can allay hostility. A soft response can placate or calm a lot of anger. And I think there's really, really great advice in this. It's far better to not fight fire with fire. Okay? If there's a fire, it's pretty dumb to go up and just think, oh yeah, this will sort it, I'll fight it with fire. It's not a really smart move. You might want some water, or if it's electrical fire, the foamy stuff, right? And the same goes for us. We don't fight with our fists, but we, in that sense, fight with our minds. We fight with our words. And in any battle, we have to remember that our most powerful weapon in our arsenal is our minds, by far. And our minds work best when they're calm. Because in a stressful situation, in a situation of duress, in a tough negotiation, we might think, having the ability to control our minds and stay calm, think about how we choose our next thought, the words we choose next, the angle we take, the tactic we take, that is powerful. So having the ability to keep ourselves calm in a crisis is really, really powerful. Now, when I went to school, we still did a lot of poetry, and Ollie and Ed, whenever they get poetry, they complain. But there's some great poems that have been written. Rudyard Kipling was a very famous poet and wrote some amazing poems. He wrote a magnificent poem. You may not know that the words I'm about to say come from this poem, but it was a poem called If. Okay, does anyone know the Rudyard Kipling poem If? One. Could ask you to recite it, but no, it's an awesome poem. You might go away and look it up because it's actually very profound. But he says, this is where those words come, if you keep your head when all around you others are losing theirs, right? Have you heard that expression? The exact words, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, or being hated, don't give way to hating. Yours is the earth and everything that's in it. Now, last bit's not really true, because we would say, based on the Bible, there's a few other things that you need to inherit the earth. But he's saying, from a purely sort of practical level, if when everyone else is losing their mind, losing their head, if you can keep your head, anything is possible. Okay? And I have found that profoundly true in my life. If you have the ability, when the sort of tempo goes up, when the angst goes up, when the stress goes up, when everyone around you is losing their head, to stay calm, often it's you that can share the pearl of wisdom, the strategy of our way through this, the tactic of how we might respond. It diffuses the situation, and it's hugely respected and appreciated. I am sure people like Daniel, people like Joseph were exactly like that. So remember in life that a few other little truisms are very helpful. If you find yourself in a debate or an argument or something, and you find yourself raising your voice to make your point, what do they say is true? It's a sign you're losing the argument. Okay? If you have to resort to raising your voice or making yourself bigger or more imposing, you're probably losing the argument. Whereas if you stay calm, have your mind in control, you can often pick the exact perfect words for the occasion. Also, as people who want to follow Christ, disciples of Christ, ours is not in life just to be reactive. So many people out there are reactive. You punch me, I punch you back. You curse me, I curse you back, right? Ours is to dance to a different tune. We can't always in life control what people say or do to us, but we can control how we respond. Ours is not to just be instinctive, just to act on our propensities, right? We're not like animals, see food, eat, right? We're not just instinctive. We don't just retaliate or respond. We've got to train ourselves to not be reactive, but to be proactive, to take a different course. Okay? Now, there's some great words in Romans 12, verse 18. It says there, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Don't take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it's mine to avenge, I will repay. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Okay, so the evil is softened by our kindness. They have a change of heart, courtesy of how we respond. Their anger melts away. A calm, soft, gentle, wise response can diffuse a lot of anger, resentment, and a very, very stressful situation that could just boil over. Okay? You try going down Hindley Street tonight and you probably won't see that in action. And the consequences of dire. People lose their life, right? Because they get involved in a physical altercation, fighting fire with fire. That's not us. We use our minds, we use our words. We are, as Jesus said, harmless as doves, wise as serpents. We're canny, we're clever, right? We pray to God and we use all the skill that God's given us. We stay calm, but we're harmless as doves. We don't go out swinging and fighting like the fool. Verse 12 to 15. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. A fool is consumed by their own lips. I like that. At the beginning, their words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness. And fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? The toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. They don't even know the way back to town. All right. Now, it's verse 12 to 13 that I'd like to focus on most. Because it says there, the words of the wise are gracious. We might think they're endearing or charming words. They're met with acceptance from those who hear them, whereas the words of the fool amount to their own destruction. Their poorly chosen words are self-incriminating, okay? And you might think of a lot of analogies about this. One that came to my mind is that the fool engages their mouth before their mind is even in gear, yeah? So their mouth goes way before their thinking, right? They just say what comes into their head, just bang, right? And as a consequence, they set off a runaway train. And we've seen and heard fools like this. These verses here in Ecclesiastes are incredibly true because they're the observations of Solomon. He saw this, right? Exactly this point. We see it today all the time. The fool starts off with some proposition. This is my view. And someone says, well, that's actually not true. You know, the empirically or the fact base is such and such. But they're a fool. They don't listen, so they just pivot to something more, which is spurious at best, probably not based on any evidence, but just something that they're plucking at the time. Then that is rebutted, so they go to something more obscure, something random that they might have seen or make up that they've seen on Google, until by the end, as Solomon said, it is absolute madness. By the end, all they're spewing forth is folly, lies, and deceit. And that is how a fool operates, right? And we've seen that. You've probably engaged in conversation with a fool who is exactly like that. People so enamoured with their own opinion that they're not willing to listen to anyone else's wisdom, not listen to the facts, but actually stay grounded in their own folly. Even if it is irrefutably wrong, the fool will still refuse to yield to their position. Now, as I said earlier, there's a bunch of truism that I think apply to this. And I want to share with you just a few little truisms of life, right? When you find yourself in a hole, Jimmy, what do you tend to stop doing? Do you know? Digging. So when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging, because if you just keep digging, you're going to get further and further into the hole. But what do we tend to do when we find ourselves in a hole? We keep digging, trying to dig ourselves out, but in the act of digging, we just go deeper. So sometimes the best thing to do when we realise actually we've said something inappropriate or something that's just not right or something that's not true is just to apologise and say, look, I'm wrong, I'm sorry. You stop digging, you stop going deeper. I love this. Does anyone know there's a brilliant, I reckon Mark Twain was probably one of the wittiest writers ever. He's full of great little sayings, right? And he said one that basically goes like this. He said, "It is better for the fool to be thought of as a fool rather than to open their mouth and confirm for all that they are indeed a fool." Right? So if people think you're a fool but you say nothing, they might just think you're a fool. But when the fool actually speaks, inevitably everyone goes, yeah, it's plain that he is a fool. You know? Because actually someone who just sits there saying nothing, we often think is quite wise, don't we, you know? The silent one, you know, even if they're stupid, we think, oh, they must be quite, savvy. You know, just sitting there, soaking it all up, very wise. Just put a frown on your forehead, say nothing, wise, right? But actually, they might be a fool and thought a fool, but when they open their mouth, often that's when we incriminate ourselves. That's exactly what Solomon's saying here in Ecclesiastes. Another great little truism in life, right? How many mouths do we have? Not a trick question. 1. How many ears do we have? 2. we should use them in proportion. I think that's a great truism, right? You've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use your ears twice as much as your mouth. Whereas the fool is all lip, right? And you get people like that. But they tend to engage their mouth before their brain. And it incriminates themselves, as Solomon says. Now, there's heaps of great proverbs that are on this topic. I'm going to give them to you. You might want to write them down. Proverbs 10 verse 19. The prudent hold their tongues. The prudent or the wise hold their tongues. Proverbs 11 verse 12. The one who has understanding holds their tongue. Proverbs 13 verse 3. Those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin. Proverbs 16 verse 23. The hearts of the wise make their mouths prudent. Proverbs 17 verse 27 to 28. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. And here's where Mark Twain got his words from. Even fools are thought wise if they keep silent, and discerning if they hold their tongues. Proverbs 18 verse 6. The lips of fools bring them strife. The mouth of fools are their undoing, and their lips are a snare to their very lives. And then lastly, Proverbs 29 verse 8, 9, 11 and 20. The wise turn away anger. If a wise person goes to court with a fool, the fool rages and scoffs, and there's no peace. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. And I like this. Do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them. Someone who speaks in haste. There's more hope for a fool than for them. So the conclusion for mine of all of that is in James 1 verse 19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. All right, we're on the last little bit, verses 16 to 20. And I'm going to skip to the last bit, which is the only bit I thought I would talk about, where it says in the end there, it says, do not revile the king, verse 20, do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say. Now, did you know that's where the expression said that comes from that said, a little birdie told me? It's from here. A little birdie told me. It's right from the Bible. Indeed, many sayings are from the Bible, and this is one of them. So, we have here a picture of someone who slanders somebody behind their back. In this case, it's the king. What's the modern... it's a synonym, isn't it? That means the same, the thesaurus. What's a modern word for that? It is gossip. Gossip. Some people are smiling already. We kind of like gossip, don't we? It's a tasty morsel. Gossip is sort of like intoxicating almost. We want a piece of it, but it's very bad. Socrates once said, right? Socrates, one of the great philosophers, he said, this is a great comment. He said, strong minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Weak minds discuss other people. Yeah? It's really good. So do you talk mostly about ideas? That's a strong mind. Events, things that have happened, average. If you just find yourself chatting about this girl did this, did you hear about that? Can you believe? Oh my goodness, shouldn't be saying this, but if you're one of those, ordinary, very ordinary. In Socrates' opinion, a weak mind. So ask yourself again, do you surround yourself with people who talk about people all the time? Because let me give you another truism in life. Everyone who talks to you about other people talks to other people about you. Okay? So if you've got friends that are always talking to you about everybody else and what they've been up to, it is highly likely that they are doing exactly that about you. All right? Everyone who gossips to you will gossip about you. Now, I had a heap of Proverbs to read out. For sake of time, I'm not going to, but I'll give you the words. There's heaps in the Bible on gossip. And I'll give you a few examples. Proverbs 11, verse 13. A gossip betrays confidence. Proverbs 16, verse 28. A gossip separates close friends. Proverbs 17, verse 9 is another one. Proverbs 18, verse 8. Exactly what I said. The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the innermost parts. It's like beautiful food. We love it. Shouldn't, but we do, just like we like bad food, right? Proverbs 20, verse 19, a gossip betrays a confidence. And lastly, Proverbs 16, verse 20, without wood, a fire goes out. Without a gossip, a quarrel dies down. And young people, I would say that a huge amount of the challenges that we face in our community as Christadelphians would disappear if we talked to each other rather than about each other. So ask yourself, do you find yourself a lot of the time talking about other people or to them? Because there's another great truism in life. Rarely do we find ourselves gossiping about other people's secret virtues. Oh, let me tell you, did you hear that Dan Trottola is actually a really nice guy? We don't tend to do that. We would say, did you hear that actually Dan Trottola did? That's what we tend to do. We rarely gossip about good stuff, do we? And another little truism, words or gossip is like toothpaste in a tube. If you squirt it all out, how hard do you reckon it is to get back into the tube? Pretty hard, hey? You'd have to find a syringe, suck it all up, it'd take forever. It's really hard, but it's really easy to squirt it all out. Gossip's like that. It's really easy just to slander someone, pass on something that isn't that pleasant about somebody else, right? Have you done that in the last few weeks? You know, there's been some challenging things that have happened in our youth circle here in Adelaide, yeah? Where were you at with that one? Were you constructive? Did you keep your thoughts to yourself, or did you have a tasty morsel that you thought was worthy of sharing, that wasn't probably at all pleasant or at all kind? Ask yourself the question, what do you do when you hear something unpleasant about somebody else? Now, this one I sound like my mum, because this is what she used to say to us as kids. If you can't find anything nice to say about somebody else, then say nothing about them at all. It's great advice, yeah? If you can't find something nice to say about someone, just don't say anything about them at all. And try to take people as you find them, not what everyone tells you. So, we're going to finish there, but I wanted to finish just by wrapping up on this sense on wisdom. What actually is wisdom? You know, have you ever thought about that? Because the Bible uses like knowledge, it uses understanding, and it uses wisdom. You might have had this at Suburban already. You know, what's the difference? There's knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Well, are they all the same thing? Well, here's my thoughts on what the difference is. You see, to know something is just to be aware of it, right? I know that when it rains, I get wet. I'm aware of that. I know it, right? To understand something is to actually comprehend the cause of it or the nature of it, right? Because you could say, I know that lightning is just, you know, a bolt of light across, the atmosphere. But you have no clue
about what causes it. But to actually understand lightning, where it's the atmosphere seeking an energy, seeking an equilibrium and all that, that means you actually understand it. What then is wisdom? Wisdom, young people, is the right application of acquired knowledge and understanding. Wisdom, even though grammatically it's not, is a verb. It's a doing word, right? Wisdom does. To be wise, we should be wise. It's not knowing stuff, it's not understanding stuff, it's doing that stuff, yeah? And the best verse that you could think about on that, in fact, I should give you the actual chapter and verse because it's a really good one, which is problematic because now I have to find it. It's in James, and it says, I know what it says, but it is James 1 verse 22, okay? And it says there, be doers of the word and not hearers only, right? So we as Christadelphian young people, we hear a lot. You come to all these studies, we hear it. We actually know it. And indeed, often we understand it. But wisdom is doing it, applying it in our lives, not just knowing it, but doing it. And James says those that don't are like people that look in a mirror and then go away and do nothing about it. They look at Jesus, they look at what's right, and then just go away and ignore it. So, young people, wise decisions is about taking what we know and understand and making good calls in life. Pausing, thinking, and then acting wisely. God bless.